There are performers and then there are forces of nature, and the difference between the two is not a matter of degree but a matter of kind, not a question of how good someone is at the thing they do but a question of whether the thing they do exists inside the boundaries of what the word performing is designed to describe, or whether it exists somewhere outside those boundaries in a territory that the word does not quite reach and that requires something else, some other word or some combination of words, or perhaps simply the acknowledgement that certain things exceed the available vocabulary and that the honest response to them is not the attempt to describe them precisely but the simple statement that they were there and that being in their presence changed something about what you understood was possible. Jonathan Winters was a force of nature. Not a performer in the sense that the word implies someone who has prepared something and is now delivering the preparation to an audience that has come to receive it. Something else. Something that arrived at the camera without preparation because preparation was not the point and would not have helped and would in fact have actively interfered with the specific quality that made what he did so extraordinary and so completely unlike anything else that Johnny Carson's stage had ever seen or would ever see again. Something that took whatever was in the room at the moment he walked into it, the air and the objects and the questions and the energy of the audience and the specific quality of the evening and whatever happened to be in front of him when the moment arrived, and transformed all of it instantly and completely into something that nobody had anticipated, and that Carson, who had anticipated everything that 30 years of nightly television could make you anticipate, could not process quickly enough to maintain the composure that 30 years of nightly television had also given him. He forgot he was on television. That is the most specific and most accurate thing that can be said about what Jonathan Winters did to Johnny Carson on the nights when it worked, which was most of the nights, which was almost all of the nights, which was essentially every time Winters walked through the curtain and settled onto the couch and Carson felt the specific quality of alertness that Winters always produced in him. The alertness of someone who knows that what is about to happen cannot be predicted and who has made a kind of peace with that fact that is different from the peace of acceptance and more like the peace of genuine excitement, the excitement of someone about to experience something they have not experienced before regardless of how many times they have experienced something like it. Carson forgot he was on television. He forgot the desk and the cameras and the audience and the production schedule and the segment timing and the specific professional obligations of a man who is responsible for 90 minutes of live broadcasting 5 nights a week. He forgot all of it. He just laughed. And the laughter was so complete and so genuine and so entirely free of the management and the calibration that most of what happened on that stage was subjected to that it was indistinguishable from the laughter of someone sitting in their living room watching something impossibly funny on a screen, except that Carson was not in his living room and was not watching a screen and was in fact the host of the program that was producing the laughter and had a professional responsibility not to be as completely undone as he clearly was. He was undone anyway. Winters did it to him every time. And the record of it, the 30 years of recordings that document the specific and irreplaceable quality of what happened when Jonathan Winters was in the room, is one of the most complete portraits of genuine uncontrollable human laughter that the medium of television has ever produced. The umbrella was the beginning of one of the most famous of these moments, though saying it was the beginning implies a kind of narrative structure that what actually happened did not quite have, because narrative structure implies that there was a plan and a direction and a shape to the thing that was moving from one point to another in a sequence that someone had designed, and none of those things were true of what Jonathan Winters did with a broken umbrella on a Tuesday night in 1981 in a television studio in Burbank, California. Carson had handed him the umbrella, or something like handing had occurred, the transfer of a prop from host to guest that in a conventional comedy segment would have served as the setup for a bit that had been worked out in advance and that the prop would illustrate at the appropriate moment. Winters took the umbrella and for a fraction of a second nothing happened, the fraction of a second in which the audience and Carson and the cameras and everyone in the control room were still operating under the assumption that what was about to happen was something that had been planned, that the prop would be used in the way that props are used, that the bit would proceed in the direction that bits proceed when they have been prepared in advance by someone who knows where they are going. And then the fraction of a second ended and Jonathan Winters became a British colonel. Not gradually. Not with the transitional gestures that actors use to signal that they are moving from one character to another. Instantly. Completely. Without warning and without preamble and without any of the scaffolding that the process of becoming someone else usually requires. One moment there was Jonathan Winters sitting on the couch with a broken umbrella. The next moment there was a slightly unhinged British colonel who had been caught in a rainstorm of unusual severity and who had opinions about the rainstorm and about the people responsible for the rainstorm and about the specific circumstances that had led to his being in the rainstorm with a broken umbrella that was failing to provide the protection that umbrellas are designed to provide, and who was going to share those opinions at some length and with considerable feeling regardless of whether the people around him had asked for them or were in a position to do anything about the situation he was describing. Carson's face in the seconds that followed the transformation was the face of a man who has been taken somewhere completely unexpected and is not yet sure exactly where he has arrived, but who is certain that wherever it is nowhere he has been before and that the journey is going to continue regardless of whether he is ready for the next part of it. He leaned forward. He leaned forward with the specific posture of someone who is trying to hear something more clearly, who wants to make sure they are not missing any part of what is happening because they understand already that what is happening is worth paying complete attention to, that this is one of the moments that you cannot afford to let pass with only partial engagement because partial engagement will not be sufficient to capture the full quality of what is being produced. The colonel spoke. He spoke with the specific authority of someone who has been a colonel for a very long time and who has therefore developed the habit of expecting his words to be treated as authoritative regardless of whether the words themselves support that expectation, who has the cadence and the vocabulary and the specific quality of clipped military certainty that is the uniform of his rank as much as the uniform he wears on his body. He spoke about the rain. He spoke about the inadequacy of the umbrella as a piece of military equipment. He spoke about Sergeant Pembroke. And then he said the thing about Sergeant Pembroke that Carson was not prepared for and that the audience was not prepared for and that probably nobody in that studio had prepared for because the thing about Sergeant Pembroke was not the kind of thing that preparation makes available. It is the kind of thing that arrives from somewhere that preparation cannot reach, from the specific and mysterious place where Jonathan Winters's mind operated when it was doing what it did best, which was finding in any situation the specific detail that nobody else would have found. The detail that was so precise and so unexpected and so completely committed to its own internal logic that the audience could not question it even as they were laughing at it because the laughing was already happening before the questioning could begin. Sergeant Pembroke, said the colonel with the flat certainty of someone reporting a historical fact, had been eaten by his own canteen. Not by an enemy. Not by some external force or creature or catastrophe. By his own canteen. The piece of equipment that a soldier carries specifically to sustain himself, the container of the water that keeps him alive, had consumed the man it was designed to serve. Carson heard this and something happened in his face that was the specific something that happened in his face when Winters said the things that nobody could anticipate, a kind of dissolution, a brief but complete failure of the professional structure that usually held everything in place. The structure collapsing not because it was weak but because the thing it had encountered was simply too unexpected and too complete and too committed to its own impossible logic for the structure to maintain itself in the face of it. He laughed. He laughed with the full weight of someone who has been genuinely surprised, who has been taken to a place they did not know existed and have discovered that the place is hilarious, who cannot apply the professional distance that they normally maintain between themselves and what is happening in front of them because the professional distance has been eliminated by the specific quality of what they are experiencing, which is too real and too immediate and too genuinely funny to be experienced at a distance. He tried to speak. He produced something that was not words but was the sound of someone attempting to produce words while also laughing at the volume that genuine helpless laughter requires, the sound of a body trying to do two things simultaneously that it was not designed to do simultaneously. He could not. He gave up attempting to speak and simply laughed, and the laughing continued for longer than laughing usually continues on live television, for longer than the schedule had space for and longer than the professional obligations of the host technically permitted and longer than Carson himself probably intended when the laughing began, because the laughing was not something he was choosing to do but something that was happening to him. The specific and involuntary response of a person who has been made genuinely helpless by something funny, who has lost the ability to manage their response because the response is operating independently of the management system. The control room had a policy for Winters's appearances. Not a formal written policy. The kind of policy that develops through repetition and experience, through the accumulation of enough moments in which the unexpected thing happened that the people responsible for the production had learned to expect the unexpected and had made certain adjustments in their approach to accommodate it. Extra cameras, positioned to follow wherever Winters went because Winters did not stay in one place and did not perform from a fixed position and could not be relied upon to remain within the frame that a stationary camera was designed to capture. The band on standby, alert and ready, because on at least one occasion Winters had decided mid-performance that the segment required musical accompaniment and had turned to the band and begun conducting them with the authority of someone who had always intended this to happen and who expected the band to follow immediately, which they did because there was something about the quality of Winters's certainty, even when the certainty was entirely invented in real time, that made following seem like the natural response. The production schedule on those nights was treated as a set of suggestions rather than requirements because experience had demonstrated that the segment timing on a Winters appearance was not something that could be predicted or controlled in advance, and that the attempt to enforce the schedule on a Jonathan Winters segment was an exercise in futility that produced frustration without producing the result that the enforcement was designed to achieve. Carson had told the crew to extend the segments quietly, without announcement, in the specific way that Carson communicated production decisions that he did not want to draw attention to. He had made clear that when Winters was doing what Winters did, the right response was to let it continue rather than to impose the structure of the schedule on something that the structure of the schedule was not designed to contain. This was not a small thing. This was a man who had been running a live broadcast for 30 years, making the specific decision to surrender the control that those 30 years had taught him to maintain, to let something happen that he could not predict or manage or bring to its conclusion at the appointed time, to trust that what Winters was doing was worth more than the schedule it was disrupting. And it was. It always was. Every time. The relationship between Carson and Winters was not simply the relationship of host and guest, not the professional relationship of two people who met at the desk and said what the segment required them to say and then went back to their respective lives until the next time the segment required their presence at the same desk. It was something more personal than that and more complicated than that and more revealing of who both men were than the professional relationship would have allowed for. Carson was someone who valued control, who had built his entire professional identity on the specific quality of composure and management that 30 years of live television had made him famous for, who was most comfortable in situations that he understood well enough to navigate with the specific efficiency and economy that were his signatures. Winters represented the complete opposite of all of this, represented the abandonment of control and management and the specific efficiency of the prepared performance, represented the willingness to go anywhere from any starting point without a map and without the security of knowing that the journey had a planned destination. Carson could not do what Winters did. Carson understood this completely and without resentment, understood that the gifts were different and that different gifts produced different results and that the results Winters produced were not results that Carson's gifts were equipped to produce, and this understanding produced in Carson not the envy or the defensiveness that it might have produced in someone less secure in their own considerable gifts, but something closer to genuine wonder. The specific wonder of someone who has encountered something genuinely beyond their comprehension and who has decided to respond to what they cannot comprehend with appreciation rather than with the anxiety that incomprehension usually produces. He watched Winters the way a person watches something they love but cannot fully understand, with the specific quality of attention that is both complete and humble, that pays full respect to the thing while acknowledging the limits of one's ability to possess it. Winters had grown up in a specific way that left marks that were visible in everything he did on camera, even when what he was doing on camera was apparently nothing to do with his history. He had grown up in a family that was not always stable in the specific ways that families need to be stable to give children the sense that the world is predictable and that the ground under their feet will remain where it was when they last checked. He had been in the military. He had been hospitalized. He had experienced the specific and devastating quality of being in a world that had stopped making sense, of the internal landscape becoming so different from the external landscape that the gap between them was impossible to navigate, of the specific terror and the specific freedom of a mind that had disconnected from its moorings and was moving through the world according to its own logic rather than the logic that most people share. And he had come out of all of this with the specific quality that is the most difficult and the most durable thing to develop, the quality of someone who has been to the place where the ordinary structures of making sense fail completely and who has discovered in that failure not catastrophe but possibility, not the end of understanding but the beginning of a different kind of understanding, the understanding that the world contains more than the structures we use to make sense of it can hold. And that the most interesting things are always in the space outside those structures, in the place where the prepared performance cannot reach and where only the person who is willing to go somewhere completely unknown can find what is there. Carson understood this about Winters in the way that you understand certain things about people without being able to articulate exactly how you know them, in the way that human beings recognize in each other something real beneath the surface presentation that the professional relationship would have kept at a safe distance, but that the specific quality of what Winters did on that stage made visible every time he did it. What he did on that stage was not separate from who he was. It was not a performance that he put on and then took off when the segment ended. It was the most direct expression of who he was that his specific gifts made possible, the most unmediated form of the thing that he actually was, which was a person for whom the structures of ordinary sense-making had become permanently optional, who could inhabit those structures when necessary but who also knew what existed outside them and who chose, on the Tonight Show stage, to show the audience what was outside them rather than what was inside, to take them somewhere that the ordinary performance could not take them because the ordinary performance was by definition contained within the structures that Winters had learned to move beyond. The moment with the broken umbrella and the Colonel and Sergeant Pembroke and the canteen that ate him was not an isolated moment. It was representative of a pattern that repeated across hundreds of appearances over the years, a pattern in which Winters arrived at the desk and Carson handed him something or asked him something or simply created the conditions in which the thing could start, and then Winters did what Winters did, which was to take the starting point and move with it in a direction that nobody had anticipated at a speed that nobody had prepared for and to arrive somewhere that nobody could have predicted, and that Carson and the audience and everyone in the studio who was watching experienced as the specific combination of total surprise and total recognition that is the signature of the truest comedy, the comedy that shows you something you did not know was there and that you immediately understand was always there. That you understand you have been in the presence of without being able to see it until this specific person showed it to you in this specific way at this specific moment. That is what the truest comedy does. It shows you the thing that was already there. It finds in the already existing material of the world the specific absurdity and the specific beauty and the specific horror and the specific delight that were already present in it but that you could not see until someone with the right kind of eye pointed at exactly the right angle and the light fell exactly the right way and the thing that had always been there was suddenly visible. Winters had that eye. He had it in a quantity that was genuinely rare, genuinely extraordinary, genuinely unlike anything else that Carson's stage produced in 30 years of producing things that were very good and occasionally extraordinary but that almost never achieved the specific quality of what Winters achieved, which was not simply the production of something funny but the revelation of something true in the form of something funny. The comedy that is also discovery, that leaves you feeling not just entertained but enlarged, not just amused but somehow more aware of the range of what is possible in the human experience of being alive. Carson knew this. Carson felt it in the way that he felt what Winters did, which was completely and without the professional distance that he brought to most things, with the full weight of genuine response that the thing deserved and that most things on his stage did not quite earn. He laughed the laugh that came from the real place. He forgot he was on television. He let the segments run long. He sat in the chair across from the couch and watched with the specific quality of total engagement that was his highest tribute to anything, the engagement that said this is worth all of my attention and I am giving it all of my attention and I am not managing what I feel about it but simply feeling it, which is the rarest and most complete form of appreciation that someone in Carson's position was capable of offering. And Winters received it the way Winters received everything, which was by continuing, by going somewhere else, by finding in Carson's laughter the specific energy that the next character or the next observation or the next impossible and perfectly realized detail required and using that energy to go somewhere that Carson had not yet been, to produce something that Carson had not yet seen, to take the moment that Carson's laughter had created and extend it into something larger and stranger and more complete than the moment alone could have been, to do what he always did on that stage, which was to make the available space larger by inhabiting it more completely than anyone had expected and to find in the expansion of the space the specific freedom that the prepared performance always denied him and that the unprepared real-time revelation of whatever was actually there always gave him. Robin Williams watched Jonathan Winters on The Tonight Show. He watched him the way that young performers watch the people they are going to spend their careers in the shadow of and in the debt of, with the specific intensity of someone who understands that they are seeing something important and who is trying to absorb as much of it as possible, who is not simply entertained by what they are watching but educated by it, changed by it, made different by the experience of witnessing it in ways that will show up in their own work for the rest of their life. Williams said that Winters gave him permission. The specific language is worth attending to because it is precise in a way that says something true about what the gift actually was, which was not a technique or a set of specific skills or a method that could be learned and applied, but something more fundamental and less transferable, something that could only be received rather than acquired, only felt rather than studied, only understood by watching it happen and recognizing in the watching something about the nature of what was possible. That had not been fully understood before. Permission. The permission to leap. The permission to go somewhere that the safety net did not cover and to trust that what was on the other side of the leap was worth more than the safety that the staying put offered. The permission to not know where you are going and to go there anyway. The permission to let the thing be whatever it is rather than what you planned for it to be. The permission to find in the unplanned and the unscripted and the genuinely unexpected the specific and irreplaceable quality of aliveness that only those things can produce and that no amount of preparation can substitute for. Winters gave Williams this permission by simply doing what he did on that stage, by doing it so completely and so fearlessly and with such total commitment to wherever the moment was going that the watching of it was itself a lesson in what commitment without safety looks like and what it produces, which is the thing that Williams spent his entire career chasing and occasionally catching, and that audiences responded to with the specific recognition of people who are in the presence of the genuine thing rather than the imitation of it. The lineage is real and the debt is real, and Williams acknowledged it publicly and repeatedly because the acknowledgement was honest and because it pointed at something true about the way that the highest comedy works, which is not through the independent invention of the isolated genius but through the specific human chain of permission and influence and debt and homage that connects one extraordinary person to the next and makes each of them possible in ways that would not have been possible without what came before. Carson sat at the desk for 30 years and watched things. He watched the full range of what human beings could produce on a live television stage, and he developed over those 30 years a specific and comprehensive understanding of what he was watching that most people who have spent time in front of cameras never develop, because most people who spend time in front of cameras are focused on what they are producing rather than on what they are witnessing. Carson was always watching as much as he was producing, always attending to the thing in front of him as much as to the thing he was doing himself, always in the specific state of readiness that allows you to respond to what is actually happening rather than to what you were expecting to happen. And what he was watching when Jonathan Winters was on the stage was something that exceeded the frameworks he had developed for understanding what he was watching, something that did not fit into any of the categories that 30 years of experience had given him for categorizing what happened on his stage, something that required him to set aside the frameworks and simply watch, simply receive. Simply be present with what was happening without the mediation of any structure that might have helped him understand it but would also have kept him at a distance from it. He set aside the frameworks. He was simply present. He laughed the laugh that came from the real place. He forgot he was on television. That forgetting is the most complete tribute that the host of a live television program can pay to a guest. The forgetting of the cameras and the audience and the schedule and the professional obligations and the specific managed quality of the live broadcast and the 30 years of training and experience that had produced the management and the calm and the composure. The forgetting of all of it. The reduction of the situation to its simplest and most essential form, which is two people in a room, one of them doing something extraordinary and the other one watching it with the full weight of their entire attention and their entire capacity for genuine response and their entire willingness to be completely present with what is happening rather than behind the glass of professional management through which most of what happens is observed at a safe and controlled distance. Carson forgot he was on television when Jonathan Winters was on the stage. He became simply a person watching something he could not quite believe was possible, something that exceeded his considerable experience and his considerable understanding of what was possible, something that arrived from somewhere he could not have predicted and went somewhere he had not been and produced in him the full and involuntary and completely genuine response of someone who has been shown something true about the world that they had not seen before and that they will not forget. That is what Jonathan Winters did. Every time. To the man who had seen everything. Every single time.